How difficult would you say it is for new hires to physically get into the door before they ghost you during the recruitment or interview process? Today we're going to be talking about just that and how to stop new hires from ghosting you. Today's webinar, I am bringing on Amber Clayton. She is a senior director at SHRM, and we cover it all from how to backfill a position quickly when a ghost occurs, how to get more applicants without creating more work for HR, and how to expedite the onboarding process for new hires before their first day even begins. Let's get right into it. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Meredith Gershenson. I'm a research analyst here at workforce.com, and today we're going to talk a little bit about how to stop new hires from ghosting you. Workforce.com, to give a little background, we're a full-service HCM software company that specializes for businesses with hourly staff. So think everything from scheduling to payroll to time and attendance to HRIS and so much more. We work with thousands of hourly staff organizations, which really allows us that qualitative and quantitative data on recruiting and hiring in the workplace and how it impacts a company's bottom line at the end of the day. Today, I am joined by a very, very special guest. I'm joined by Amber Clayton. She is the Senior Director of the Knowledge Center of Operations at SHRM. Amber, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Amber is the senior director at SHRM, and she leads a team of HR experts who field, on average, 60,000 HR-related inquiries from members a year. She is frequently sought after as a speaker and expert for webinars, conferences, and media interviews, and holds specialty credentials in California law, inclusive workplace culture, and workplace investigation. So, Amber, you're the perfect person for this topic, talking about absenteeism, recruiting, hiring, all across the board, right? We're really covering the gamut here. And ghosting is something that has really increased as 2023 has progressed. Obviously we're at the end of it. 2024, I hate to say, will probably hold a lot more statistics for ghosting in the recruiting process, especially within hourly wage industries.
Yes.
Awesome. I would love for you to tell me a little bit about some of the work that you do with SHRM and the Knowledge Center that you run.
Sure. So the Knowledge Center is comprised of two pieces. One of them is our Express Requests, which is a self-service feature where we compile resources on various topics and have that available for our members just to save them on research time. And then the secondary part of it is our Ask an Advisor service. And that's the one that you mentioned that has the 60,000 inquiries a year. Our members get this as part of their benefit. They can reach out to our experts via phone, chat, email. They can ask any HR related question at all, and we will provide guidance and resources to help them with those questions. Generally, the top questions that we tend to get revolve around leave management, the family and medical leave under in the U.S., and then also compensation related questions, as well as disability accommodations and employee relations and termination. So this tend to be our top questions, but they can run the gamut.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, you're a toolbox of information, essentially, when it comes to pointing people to resources, making sure that they've got the right information. I think that's amazing. And yeah, we definitely kind of go across the board here. I think the concept of ghosting really touches on a lot of different factors at play within these organizations, within processes specific to HR, right? So I would love for you to tell me a little bit about, how big an issue ghosting has been since COVID. I think it really kind of blew up after COVID happened. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so ghosting has been around for a long time.
Sure.
For single people like myself who have used dating sites, ghosting has actually, something that's pretty common on there when you're having conversations with some people, or you decide you want to go out with people and they just don't show up. You don't get a call. You have no reason why. That's considered ghosting. And the same thing can happen in employment. You have employees who can ghost their employers. And then you also have employers who are ghosting their candidates. And during the pandemic, we've actually seen that ghosting has increased from what it has been in past years. And, I read an article recently that talked about there was a person who said, a psychologist who said that younger individuals who are accustomed to texting and not necessarily having conversations they might find it a little bit more difficult to interview, which I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, but there's a tendency sometimes for more younger applicants or candidates to ghost as opposed to other candidates. I have not seen that research, but this is something that the psychologist had mentioned, and I just thought it was interesting. But of course, there's varying issues why people decide to ghost.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting statistic. I could kind of see where it falls into place, right? Where younger employees, there's maybe a lack of accountability. They're not necessarily used to that face-to-face interaction, especially those who are coming out of COVID still. Even, we talk like, even if we're going like preschool, elementary school age, there's studies that are showing, hey, they have a harder time communicating. I feel like in a sense, we've all been impacted by that to a certain extent. So yeah, I do think that's something to take into consideration, but I do love the aspect of what can the employer do to kind of make it a little bit more streamlined? Like, what are the accountability measures that we should be holding to ourselves and saying, holding up a mirror and being like, where have we gone wrong in this recruiting process? What have we done better? What could we have done better? And again, the aspect of ghosting, it feels a little bit, that's on them. Like, they don't want to be here. That's fine. We don't want them. No, what can we do to better our own process at the end of the day? And I think that's where this webinar will cover the gamut on that.
Yeah, so employers should really have a formal process in place for their interviewing, for sourcing candidates, screening, interviewing, hiring. They should have some steps in place and measures that they have so that they could avoid or at least try to decrease the number of people who are ghosting. And some employers will implement technology, for example, that might give them an automated text that says, "Oh, hi, so-and-so, you have an interview scheduled for here. Please press C to confirm." And, actually many businesses like, I think I mentioned this in a prior conversation with you, healthcare and dentists. I know I get multiple texts saying your appointment's coming up because they get ghosted too by patients. And that is a problem. Somebody else might be missing an appointment because someone has ghosted. And it's the same thing for an employer. If someone ghosts, that's one, opportunity where they could be talking to another candidate. And so I think that having these processes and procedures in place to ensure that you're regularly communicating with those individuals can help to decrease the ghosting, whether it's, following up after the interview to say, "Hey, we're still in the process. We're running your background check," and just keeping them informed, because during those periods where you're not communicating with them, they could be, going and looking at other jobs. They might feel like, "Oh, well, they haven't called me back in a couple of days, so maybe they're not interested in me. So I'm just going to go pursue something else." So I think the communication, the formal processes, the follow-up, all of those things are really important for employers to do if they want to try to prevent the ghosting.
Absolutely. To back up even more from that, at what part of the interview process or even the recruiting process do you consider an employee having had ghosted HR or even vice versa?
Yeah, so that's interesting. I think people have different perceptions of what's considered ghosting, because I've heard where applicants think that once they submit a resume and an application to an employer, if that employer doesn't reach back out to them in some way, whether it's email or text or phone, that they're ghosted. And in actuality, that's not really ghosting them. It's when you have that initial contact with someone. So if the recruiter actually reached out to those individuals and said, "We're interested in talking to you," and then all of a sudden you don't hear anything from them, you don't get an appointment, that's the point where it becomes a ghosting situation. So, so it's really when that interaction occurs with the ghosting. And most of the ghosting probably occurs more in the first interview stages, rather than when somebody already gets through the process, they have the background check complete, and then they're ready to be hired. There's probably less ghosting there than there is in the initial stages of the interview process.
That's such a good point. It feeds me well into this next section, talking about how to backfill a position quickly if a ghost occurs. I almost wish that this topic was closer to Halloween, because I feel like the amount of times I'm going to be saying ghosts today.
Yeah, we actually wrote an article right around Halloween that talked about ghosting. So
that is so funny. We should have backtracked.
Yeah, absolutely. So backfilling the position. This is employers need to think about this regardless of the ghosting or not, because you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. Have a few candidates that your final candidates that you can interview just in case someone decides to pull themselves out of the process. I would say have a pool of candidates. It's always good to be able to continue sourcing candidates because you just don't know when people are ready to retire, to leave employment, maybe they're to not show up for the job or to accept the job and then decide they don't want the job. So I think it's important for employers to not just stop at the process or not just interview one person, but make sure that they have a pool of candidates for the position just in case these things happen.
Absolutely. This perfectly feeds me into this slide on strategies and the top 5 reasons a new hire goes. And my question for you is, what strategies do you actually recommend HR to quickly identify and address an absence at the end of the day, kind of taking in these top 5 reasons that new hires ghost?
Well, I think your mismatched job roles here is a really good one, because there are times when employers will post a position online, but the position isn't detailed the way that it really is. So oftentimes what happens is people are looking at these job ads, they go and they talk to the individual or they have a phone screen with the individual, and what they've tried to apply for is not actually what the job role is. So there's a mismatch between what the candidate thought the job was and what the job really is. So employers really need to be, as clear and as detailed as they can on the job description so that people are applying to the jobs that either they're qualified for and that they actually want. I mean, nobody wants to waste their time interviewing somebody if it's just not a match. So I think, making sure that you have good, accurate job descriptions or postings is really important from the very beginning. So employers' poor communication, that goes back to what we talked about as not having that formal process, not having the follow-up, not communicating with the candidates. All of those things are going to most likely lead to someone ghosting in the process. So it's really important to make sure that you're texting, you're emailing, you're calling, and keeping in contact with those individuals. Because again, they could be interviewing with multiple employers. And if you really want that candidate, you really need to stay on top of that and make sure that you're communicating with them.
I think that's such a good point. In terms of, next steps that they can take, that HR can take to kind of initiate a fast and effective backfilling process, what do you recommend here for HR to kind of more smooth it out a little bit better?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's really evaluating their current process of interviewing. I don't know that it's going to be fast per se. I'm sure that there's pieces of it that can be quickly adjusted. Things like making sure there's a formal process, making sure that there's steps in the process that you can actually communicate to the candidates. That might be hard for some organizations that don't have the technology available, but maybe there are dedicated people, or maybe there's a way that you can automate it through the systems that you currently have to be able to make sure that they know that they're still in the process, or that you're delayed, or you need to reschedule because the hiring manager is sick, making sure that there's that communication. But the backfilling piece, again, that's where the employers really need to make sure that they have a pool of candidates and they're looking at different areas. So not just your traditional posting to one website online. And I don't want to say the website, but there's a website that many employers post to, and then that's it. They should really be looking at other sources, untapped talent pools. There are individuals who are undertapped or untapped, like older workers, individuals with disabilities, people who have past incarceration, veterans. There are many people out there that are not sourced and they're great employees. So, looking at some of these organizations and, working with your state's Department of Labor, the workforce boards, these are all ways that you can help to source and get candidates and, just continue to have that pool of candidates coming in if you've got positions that regularly turn over or you have increases in the number of employees or positions that become available.
in terms of communication channels, like making sure those stay open, making sure that managers, HR, everyone across the board is informed, what do you recommend in terms of, how HR can actually establish these communication channels to ensure that supervisors and even, frontline team members are promptly informed of somebody didn't show up or we need somebody to backfill quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, many employers use job requisition forms. So when a position does become available, typically the hiring manager might fill out the job requisition that has all the details of the job, and then HR recruiting, if they have someone there, would use that information in order to post the job and then keep that hiring manager informed. Usually, if there's a great need for this person to come on board, the hiring manager is going to go to your recruiter or your HR manager and say, "What's happening? What's the status?" But you don't want that necessarily. So you just have to be proactive in making sure that you're communicating to the hiring manager that you've interviewed X number of people or you've received X number of resumes, but not everybody is qualified. Just really communicating that to the employer. And that can be done depending on the size of the organization. It could be done via email. It could be done during, through an applicant tracking system, or ATS, as most people know it by, and then the manager can actually see where the recruiter is or the talent acquisition team is for hiring those open positions.
Absolutely. And I think a really important topic to discuss here is the aspect of labor laws, aspect of compliance, making sure that, hey, the backfilling process is actually adhering to these labor laws. So my question for you is, how can HR ensure that this backfilling process adheres to labor laws, and what steps should they take to document and handle these situations appropriately?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, when it comes to backfilling, one of the things I would just caution employers on is when they lay someone off or when they terminate someone, the timing of when they rehire that position or post that position can be really important, because somebody who might be laid off and they see their job has now been posted, then they're like, okay, was the layoff a pretext for a involuntary termination for something that might have been discriminatory or retaliatory? That timing of it seems kind of odd that, Joe got laid off, but then now all of a sudden his position is posted, and, that could potentially be perceived as, some illegal reason why they might have terminated to begin with, and they just used it as a means to let that person go. Same thing if somebody is working and the employer posts the position. That's not illegal. However, you run that chance of that employee seeing that their position is posted online. I just had a friend who had that happen to her recently, where somebody had come to her and said, "Hey, are you leaving? Your position was posted online," and she had no idea. They were actually going to promote her, but they didn't tell her, and they just posted for her position. So it was obviously, I would be very concerned by that. So when you're backfilling positions, just be cautious about the timing of it, whether or not the person is terminated or they voluntarily terminate. Many employers require employees or ask employees to have written resignation letters, so they're not in a situation where someone says they're going to leave and then they decide to change their minds. Employers don't have to rescind the resignation, but it's best to have something in writing. That way, if they've already started to recruit for that position, they don't need to stop in that process. So when it comes to backfilling, like individuals who have been there or their current employees, those are some of the things that you want to think about. And of course, not just with backfilling, but with hiring altogether, you want to make sure that you are complying with the laws. I mean, obviously, you don't want to do anything that could be seen as discrimination based on a protected class, which could be, age or sex, gender, religion. I'm trying to think of the other, all the other ones that are in there, but you don't want to have that in your process. And you want to make sure that if you are using any kind of technology, I know artificial intelligence, there's been, conversations, and I think a law even in New York City, where you have to make sure that your systems are not inadvertently discriminating against applicants. So those are some of the things to think about when you think about complying with the law and with recruiting individuals. Not necessarily backfilling, but these are things that you need to comply with when you're doing these the hiring practice or the hiring process.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. Another instance kind of a situation that a lot of HR managers, specifically within shift-based industries, are coming across is new hires not showing up on the first day of work. And that is something that is really prevalent in today's day and age. I think it's really interesting. We actually had a client, Reef Parking, and John, who is, I believe, their HR generalist, HR manager, head of HR. He uses shift bidding a lot because a lot of the times on their busy seasons, because they deal with the summer seasons a lot and they onboard tens of thousands of employees during this busy time, a lot of the times there's many, many employees that don't show up, and it's really unfortunate. And they're newer employees, whatever, they need all this training, all that good stuff. They don't even get through the door at this point. So what they've used is, we have this shift bidding tool on our end where they've actually been able to hand out the shift that the employee never showed up for to their existing staff. Relying on existing staff is huge, right? Making sure that they are compliant, making sure that they have the right credentials in place. They only send out the shift bidding to those who are qualified to work that shift if it requires any sort of certification. So yeah, relying on your existing staff, I think that really goes overlooked a lot of the times, especially when it comes to new employees not showing up on their first day. I think that's super, super prevalent in today's day and age.
Absolutely. And, the shift bidding that you mentioned is great. I mean, obviously you want to be able to have someone to be able to take on those responsibilities. Some people like to have the overtime, the extra hours. So it's great that can be offered to employees. I would just make sure though that you're not burning out your current employees. We saw that during the pandemic where individuals had left employment or they've been laid off, and then someone else assumed the person's responsibilities, and then they got burned out on it. So you want to be mindful of making sure that your current employees are okay and they're not burned out. But also making sure that you're addressing why people are not showing up for work. And that could be for various reasons. It could be maybe they found a job making more money somewhere else, or it could be that they found better benefits. Look at your employee reviews online. Sometimes you'll be able to assess through Yelp or some other reviews, employee reviews. Glassdoor is one of them. You can see what people are saying. Employee engagement surveys is another way that you can see how the employees feel about the organization. If I'm a candidate and I'm researching an organization that I want to work for, and I see on reviews that employees are like, oh, the leadership is terrible, the benefits are bad, anything like that, I'm going to be hesitant to apply for the job. So I think, really trying to understand what is it that's preventing people from coming in after we've done all of these interviews. And maybe that's even reaching out to them, to those individuals to say, hey, we're sorry that you didn't show up for this interview, or, that you chose not to pursue this job, and see if you can find out why. I don't know that many will tell you, but I think what happens is with ghosting, some people just don't like the confrontation. They don't want to have the difficult conversation. And so they just decide, you know what, I'm just not going to go my first day. And then they'll know, they'll know that I don't want to work there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, the bottom line of the backfilling aspect is making sure that you have a really rich and deep pool of applicants to kind of choose from. Again, I think, as you said, it's really hard to get feedback from employees who have ghosted you because, again, they've ghosted you, they're gone. They're nothing to be seen there. So it's hard to feel like, hey, I can communicate with these guys again. I can actually get some insight from them. When in reality, it's kind of just fine to move on to your next candidate. And hopefully your applicant pool is rich enough that you can have many to choose from. It actually feeds me really well into this next section on how to get more applicants without creating more work for HR. And I want to share this next slide on how to build that applicant tracking pool based on this little graphic here. So Amber, my question for you is what strategies do you actually recommend for HR to more efficiently broaden their applicant pool without significantly increasing their workload at the end of the day?
Sure. So, as I mentioned, we talked about an applicant tracking system. So, that's always really helpful because you can have individuals apply, they can attach their resumes, it gets filtered into a system, and you actually set it up to be able to ensure that you're getting the right match for the position based on the skills and the knowledge that you set up within the ATS. So, that could be really helpful. And a lot of employers do have an ATS system. So, that's one thing that can help eliminate some of the administrative burden of going through hundreds of resumes and making those selections. So that's probably one of the key things that employers could do. The other thing is just making sure that when you're posting, don't just post in one place. Make sure that you have built relationships and you could send it out to your network, send it out to the organizations that you have these openings, and then that way you're getting people applying from different places. And it shouldn't be that administratively burdensome to do that. Once you build those relationships, it could just be a simple email. It could be something through technology to be able to send out the job postings to different areas. And then also making sure that you're looking at different pools of candidates. So we talked about untapped and undertapped talent pools, but we didn't talk about employer referrals, which is huge. Many employers have employer referral programs where they provide some type of a bonus or incentive for employees to refer other employees to the organization. So if that's not something that an employer currently has, they may want to start implementing it because that's a good way to get more employees to the organization. Another source is looking at your previous employees, your former employees. Many employees during the pandemic had actually left their employers, but then they found that the grass was not always greener on the other side and they wanted to come back. And that's what we call boomerang employees. So if you have employees who were great employees and they left for, let's say they left because they had a family situation or they had, maybe they did get a little bit more. Reach out to those individuals and see how their jobs are going. Sometimes they're not going great and people hesitate to go back to their former employer because they're embarrassed or they don't want to ask. But really, that's an opportunity for you to be able to bring somebody back who's already trained, who knows your business, who knows your culture. So I would say, look at your former employees and keep those relationships, network with them on LinkedIn, make sure that you're keeping in contact with them. I know I've had that, several times, and people that have retired that had worked here, we actually hired them back as working part-time. So you've got retirees who might be out there and they decide, you know what, I really need something to do. I want a couple of hours, reach out to those retirees too. And the other thing is working with your local schools and your colleges and universities, having some type of an apprenticeship program, an internship program. Those are really great ways to be able to get employees on board in the organization and train them the way that you want them to be trained and what you want them to learn. So that's another great strategy for being able to find employees.
Absolutely. And, I think what this slide really represents is the labor market is incredibly, incredibly tight these days, right? There's a lot of competition out there from the employer side. It's kind of an employee's world and we're just living in it, so to speak. So we actually, this first point, utilize an ATS, an applicant tracking system. We just rolled out our very own ATS system, and it's awesome in terms of, it's tied in with our scheduling platform. So that way it collects hours from local applicants, as this slide says, and it collects hours. So it's saying, hey, does this person want to be part-time, full-time, whatever it is, and it feeds that in directly into your scheduling. So it actually could get them scheduled and onboarded in like 3 minutes on average, which is really, really cool. So it's something that it's very, very relied on in today's day and age, and technology should be leaned on a little bit more to help kind of bridge that gap between the tiresome aspect of recruiting that a lot of HR doesn't necessarily love in their day-to-day, and relying on an ATS to help bridge that a little bit better and make it just life a little bit easier for you. I mean, it takes a lot of the workload out of begrudging aspect of, re-engaging, looking to former staff, reaching out, looking at students, whatever, marketing. And an ATS is just the perfect storm between all of it, and making sure that it's all kind of wrapped up, and making sure that, you got it all out there, and you're recruiting the right people at the right time.
Yes, absolutely. And for those organizations that may not have the ability to be able to recruit internally, they can look at other organizations. They can look at recruitment agencies, staffing agencies. They can look to a professional employer organization, a PEO. There are organizations out there, and there's even people that you could hire as consultants that might be willing to help you with recruiting. They might be independent recruiters. There's so many different options out there that you can utilize to help in your recruitment efforts if you don't have someone or a team dedicated to doing that internally.
Absolutely. And we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but in terms of employee referrals, right? Kind of bringing in friends, family, even whoever it might be, how can leadership encourage and leverage employee referrals effectively to kind of enhance, to build up that application pool?
Most employers provide incentives. So they may say, okay, if you bring somebody in, we'll give you $100 gift card. And then after 6 months of that person being employed, we'll give you another $100 gift card. So a lot of times they'll give some type of a monetary incentive to encourage employee referrals. That seems to be the most common that I've seen. But, it could be not monetary. It might be something like, you get some kind of a coupon or some kind of a discount, anything like that, depending on what the industry is. But I would say most employers give some kind of a monetary incentive to encourage employee referrals.
In terms of kind of going through the entire application process, what do you think HR can do to kind of better the experience, for these possible candidates, to make it a little bit more of like a smoother experience, a little bit more attractive? Are there any technologies you recommend and making it kind of more automated, anything like that?
Well, I mean, the ATS is a good place to start, and making sure that your application process is not 10, 20 pages long. It's so daunting to be able to apply for a job. And it's been a while for me. I've been here for almost 12 years now, and I haven't applied, but I know, and I can remember, sitting on the computer, and it would take me an hour just to do one application for one job. And, it's pretty daunting. And right now, many people use their mobile devices in order to apply for jobs. So you want to make sure that your systems are mobile friendly, that people can just go on and easily apply for the jobs via their mobile devices and be able to submit their resumes in that way. The paper and pen process is really outdated, but I do know that there's many organizations that still do that, where somebody actually comes into the building and they, sit and they write out their applications and everything. Of course, it's better to be automated. It's much faster, but also just, thinking about the process. How long does it take? Is it really necessary for them to fill out all of this information? Trying to make it as brief as possible, but still getting all the information that you need in order to bring them in for an interview, or to do a phone screen and assess whether or not they're a good fit for the job. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And it perfectly kind of feeds us into this next part, talking about how to expedite the onboarding process for new hires before their first day. I think that this is a really big missed opportunity here. So I'm going to pull up this next slide super quick on kind of what that looks like in terms of recommended steps here. So talking about, engaging hires before their first day, looking at things like a welcome kit, assigning a person to contact, a buddy, as I've been told, requesting feedback, what those intros might look like, and discussing onboarding before it even begins. Amber, my question for you is, what steps do you recommend to onboard new hires before their first day to ensure they're ready to hit the ground running on day one?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we do get that question pretty frequently in the Knowledge Center, because one of the concerns that comes out of it is, if we make the employee or the candidate who is not started yet fill out the paperwork ahead of time, do we have to pay them for filling out that paperwork? And there's no clear answer on this. So, typically what I would encourage employers to do is to provide them a package of information with their tax forms and things that they might need to read and fill out, and say, here it is. If you'd like to, fill it out ahead of time, that's great. If not, we can do it during the first day. We'll sit down with you. We'll go over the paperwork with you, but just giving them an opportunity, if they want to complete that paperwork beforehand, and maybe just the necessary forms, like the tax forms that you want to get into the payroll system. The I-9 form is something that could be filled out in advance, and a lot of employers may not realize that, but they can do that in advance. But they have to see the documentation once the person begins employment, and then fill out their employer portion of it. So, there are things that can be done before the actual start date, and giving them the benefit package so they could review it with their families to determine what type of health insurance they want to sign up for. I mean, all of those things are really helpful for them to see before they even come in the door. And then, of course, when they come in the door, one of the things that I've heard and I've seen is, we have a new hire orientation, and the new hire orientation is an hour long where we fill out paperwork, and the onboarding process is very short. And I would just say, onboarding takes a while. It takes a while for people to become acclimated to the job. So you want to have that new hire process where you're kind of going through the administrative things. You're going through and, telling them about the location of the break room, the bathrooms, and, all of those things like that. But you want to make sure too that you have an onboarding process where you pair them with someone, give them a point of contact, a buddy, somebody that they can ask questions to. And so they don't feel like they're alone in this. And, sometimes they don't want to come to the boss directly, because then they feel like, well, this boss is going to think that I don't know anything, or that I'm asking too many questions. So pairing them with someone within the organization is a really good way to help retain those individuals and build relationships with others as well. Also, too, there's training, making sure that there's a formalized training program. I've seen and I've heard, and I've been in a situation where I've just been thrown to the wolves. You go in there and it's like, okay, you know how to do this, go right ahead. And there's really no formal process, and you're kind of scrambling going, what do I do? And it's instances like those that make you feel like, okay, this is not right. I don't like this culture. I might want to move on, so, just having some processes, some training, a buddy, mentor, all of those things can be really helpful in the onboarding, training, and retaining those individuals.
Absolutely. It actually reminds me of one of our clients we have called Streets Team Enterprises. They're great. We love them. We work with their HR over there. Her name's Tani. And I was talking to her about, their model, their business model. They work primarily with those who are homeless and giving them roles in their community, giving them jobs, and doing just a lot of community-based work. It's an incredible organization. I highly recommend you guys checking them out. But, accountability is a really big part in kind of teaching these individuals, these new employees, that they onboard a lot throughout the year. And they're kind of, instead of recruiting, they're more accepted into Streets team. And it's really hard to kind of hold that accountability aspect, and streamlining that onboarding process is huge. If you could get a kickstart on it, amazing. If you could kind of have them on board on the mobile app, Workforce has a great mobile app, gets them onboarded super quickly and quite literally minutes. That's amazing. It's already, there's accountability to be said there. It's already kind of gotten them through the door in a sense, even if it is in a technological way. They've already kind of committed to a certain extent. So yeah, that accountability aspect Tani was saying is huge, to be able to already get them onboarded before their first day. It's absolutely massive. I'm curious, what your thoughts are on how HR could kind of get ahead or, streamline the paperwork, the mundane part of onboarding while also staying compliant. I think that's a huge part of it.
Yes, I think, again, looking at the documentation that's required of employees, of course, there's going to be required forms like your tax forms, like your I-9. There may be state required forms as well that need to be completed. But, looking at the other forms, and the length of those forms and what you're asking for, and are they redundant? Is it really necessary for them to fill out, X number of policy acknowledgments when you have a handbook, and those things are in the handbook as well. So, really kind of looking at everything that needs to be completed and making sure that it's necessary or required, and not just something for them to sign off on because you think that there might be a risk for whatever reason that they didn't sign off on this particular policy. So, looking at that. And then, of course, the automated piece of it, that's always helpful, making sure that, if they have laptops, computers that they can work on, tablets, that they might be able to do things that are electronic. And that's easier for employers too. They can electronically store their records, so that's, maybe prevents them from having to have big file cabinets with a lot of files in it and, having to deal with all those things. So many employers actually do electronic, record keeping. So I think, those things can help streamline the process.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked a little bit obviously about automation, right? In terms of other methods, tools, technology, anything like that, do you recommend for delivering a little bit more effective pre-employment training to newer hires, kind of, again, making sure that they're walking through the door with some footing, some kind of sense of what they expect or what they know that they're going to walk into?
So I would be careful about the pre-employment training, just because if there is training that's done before the start date, it could be compensable and actually changes that hire date. So you want to be careful about that. But what I encourage, and I've done for many years, is having a job preview. So as part of your interview process and your hiring process, allowing that individual to come into the organization, to sit with an employee, to see the workplace, the work environment, to talk to other employees, to get a sense of what the job is and the culture is. And that is a really good way for them to kind of see the inside and get the scoop and see whether or not it's really the right fit for them. And that actually, the process in itself, I know I've been through it myself, and I've really appreciated being able to do that, because I've looked at something and said, you know what, I don't know if this is the right job for me. And I'd rather that happen in the beginning of the process versus me having to go through the whole hiring process, paying for the background checks, hiring that person, and then finding out within a couple of weeks that they are just not working out well. So I would say, a job preview is a really good way to give them a sense of what the job is. Just make sure that it's not training, because again, that could be considered work and compensable time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In terms of, again, going back to communication, a huge principle that we always talk about during these webinars, how can HR maintain communication with new hires before their start date, to answer any questions, to help with any missing information? What do you recommend here without feeling like it might be overkill or you might be scaring them off in a sense?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you don't want to be calling them every day.
For sure.
But you could certainly say, here's what the next steps in the process are, and I'm going to contact you in 2 days, and just keeping them abreast of what's happening in the process, I think, is really important. I wouldn't say, like I said, you don't want to call them all the time and feel like you're hounding them or anything like that, because that's just going to push them away. But I think as long as you give them the expectations, I think that will go a long way. And just making sure that you're not leaving long periods of time where you're not speaking to them, because again, you could lose them in that process. So keeping the communication open, but not too much.
Absolutely. And I think, talking a little bit about this pre-employment training, or, talking about onboarding before their start date, it kind of keeps that communication channel naturally opened. It keeps them top of mind as you as a company and saying, hey, we're still here. We're excited to see you walking through that door on the very first day. And yeah, I think naturally that already kind of maintains that communication channel that we're talking about here, and making sure that there's not too long of a lull, that they're not forgetting about you. I think there's something to be said about still selling yourself even after they might have accepted the offer at the end of the day, because they're not liable to they're not tied to you completely. There's always an aspect that they could ghost between the time that they that you've given their offer letter or given their offer and the time that they've walked through the door already on the first day. I think it's that really precarious time that you really need to look out for.
Yes, absolutely. And, it could be as simple as, sending them an email and just saying, we're really excited about you starting next week. Something like that. It can go a long way. The other piece to it too, and something around the hiring process or the steps, I would say, make sure that you are welcoming these individuals, that you're prepared for them to start. I think one of the big frustrations that I've heard from employees is that they get to the work site, their desk is not set up, they don't have the technology, it's, the employer is unprepared for them to be there. Make sure that everything is in place so that when they come, they feel welcome. Tell your other employees that these individuals are starting, have them welcome them as well. You can do lunch with people when they first start to get to know them on a personal level, and just to start that whole relationship building, because these are individuals that are, if they're full-time, you're going to be working with them a lot, and you want to get to know them, and you could ask questions that maybe you couldn't ask in the interview process, like, oh, do you have any dogs, things like that, and just making them feel like they're being brought into the team, that they're part of the team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of going back to that last slide, talking about beginning those intros, and it can either be beginning intros from the employee, the new hire side, the candidate, the person who's filling out the application side of things, or those who are already on the team saying, hey, why don't we write a card? Why don't we send a little video? Something that could be really, really nice, again, to keep them interested as a new hire. For new hires, it can be, hey, fill out this like little fun fact, fill out something, about your dog or something, your family that you want to share with us, anything like that. And it kind of already bridges that communication with the entire team, and it already tethers them. There's that loyalty that's being built before they walk in the door. And I think that's really important. It kind of goes overlooked a lot of the times, where if, existing member of the team sends the new hire a message saying, hey, I'm really excited to meet you. I'll be your buddy. I'll be your POC. I think that's really special. And it really does build that loyalty virtually before there's even any in-person contact there, especially within these shift-based industries. That's huge. That's so important.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I want to end off on our high note. My favorite question to ask: what are one or two top tips, actions, or takeaways that you can give our audience to kind of walk away with to better stop new hires from ghosting at the end of the day?
Yeah, again, making sure that your brand, your job descriptions, those things are detailed, they're accurate. That information is really important because, again, these individuals are researching your companies just like you're out there trying to bring them in. So make sure that it looks good on your website, and check out the reviews from other employees as well, and make sure that you are following up on those as necessary, because, again, people who are looking for jobs, they're looking at the employee reviews, they're looking at your website, they're looking at your job description. So make sure that you don't have anything in there that might deter them from applying for a job. And then, of course, the communication piece of it, making sure that when you do research, or when you're reviewing the resumes and you're reaching out to people, set up appointments, make sure that they're comfortable talking on the phone or on video if it's a video camera. Just having that communication with them, making sure that you are meeting them when you say you're going to meet them. I think that's really important. And so many times there's situations where the employer is late to an interview, or maybe they forget to call. Those things happen. You want to make sure that you are, again, keeping those appointments, talking to those individuals when you say you're going to talk to them, and in the communication piece of it, and just, formalizing the process and making sure that you're doing the same thing consistently with all of the candidates, I think is really important. Making sure you've got your interview questions in place, making sure that you can answer questions. I know this is a question I get frequently, and that is, what's your workplace culture like? And you want to be honest about it. I tell people, be transparent, give them the good, the bad, the ugly, because at the end of the day, you're interviewing them just like they're interviewing you, and you want them to feel comfortable in this job just as we want you to feel comfortable. And so you want it to be a good fit. Be honest with them, be transparent about what it is, and you're going to have a better relationship with those individuals, and somebody's really going to want to come on board if you are, candid about these things. I think it's really important.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you so, so much for coming on today. I learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience did too. It's always so nice having these conversations with you, Amber. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. For our audience, for more videos like this, be sure to subscribe to our channel. We're releasing them constantly, so be sure to stay on top of it and subscribe. And until next time, I will see you all at the next webinar. Have a good day, everybody.